Today is September 16th. My name is Teresa Larson, and I'm talking with Nancy Jo Carroll here in Ames. Nancy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, TJ. I really enjoy the opportunity.
Do I have your permission to record your face and your comments today?
Yes, you do.
Great, thank you very much. We always start with this because it's the easy question. When and where were you born?
Ames, Iowa, June of 1957, and I was born at Mary Greeley Medical Center.
You have the wonderful experience of growing up in Ames, and because we're going to be talking about your influence on some of the recreational and parks opportunities in Ames, tell me about the kinds of things that you used in Ames as you were growing up.
Yeah,
the parks.
That's a great question. Of course, I grew up really in the 1960s and 70s, and back in the 1960s, the park system was everything was just simpler, of course, in the 60s. But we did things, as I remember, as a community. They would flood the tennis courts at Ames Grove and at Brookside, and we would go and skate and skate and skate, and it was just an enjoyable time. My dad was a big mushroom hunter, so we'd go to the park system and hunt mushrooms. Municipal pool, I started to go there some, because that's kind of mid-60s is when that opened for year-round swimming. But the big thing was I went every day in the summer. We only lived 2 blocks away from Carr's pool, and that's where I learned to swim, swimming lessons. And of course it was under private ownership then. And so Carr's pool was just central to my life in the summer. I'd go 2 or 3 times a day. So those are kind of a general.
Could you reflect on what it was like to have the freedom to roam around parks during that time period?
Yeah, great question. You could. I mean, I don't ever remember my mom being worried. I had a brother that was 2 years older, so he and I would many times be together. But we would go up near Homewood, because Homewood and Ames Grove were very close to our house, and we would roam the woods of Ames Grove in particular. We would get in trouble, though, if we went down by the river. We were told not to go by the river, so I think pretty much we honored that. But we could leave, in the morning and come back for lunch, and then go again in the afternoon. And I don't ever remember having any fear of anything. It was just a really, but again, Ames stopped in the 60s. I can remember early on, it stopped probably at about 20th Street. Homewood was almost kind of the north end of our community. And so when we got up there was still a farmhouse and, all sorts of things that were just way different than what we know now in 2015.
I want to pick up the thread of the issue of security just a little bit later. So, you obviously had an adventuresome spirit. Mm-hmm. You obviously liked being outside.
Sure.
Tell me a little bit about your high school and college years and kind of how they shaped you as a professional.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, high school, of course, I went to Ames High, and then it was just the 3 grades of 10, 11, 12. Same thing. I loved high school. I was active in, and this is just when Title IX was starting for young women. So prior to 1973 or 4, whenever that kicked in, we didn't have a lot of sports at Ames High, and so they started to offer things like track and golf, gymnastics. I was on the very first girls basketball team, and that was my junior year of 1974, and that was just the blooming of all of that. And I don't think then I appreciate how much that meant, that we really work on that first class to have girls basketball. And it's ironic because my mom is native from Kelly and Slater, and she played on the state tournament for Slater in 1949. And the big schools didn't have any sports for us. And so it was exciting to be getting to do those things. So that really did shape me. My brother had been a big basketball sports person, and then I got to start to do something like that. So I don't know if that experience I went to the University of Northern Iowa after high school, and I majored right off the bat in recreation. And ironically for you and I, that recreation major was only 2 or 3 years old. And so it was awesome that I got to major in recreation. I didn't even know really what I was majoring in and what the future could hold with that degree. But I did that, and I double majored. I liked interior design too, so I double majored. And UNI was a great community, also Cedar Falls, Waterloo. I was very active in my sorority, and that's kind of when I started to figure out, whoa, I maybe could be a little bit of a leader, because I started to have leadership roles in my sorority, and that really taught me, because I really hadn't had any leadership in high school formally. It was more sports and fun and school. So that was that tipping point. And so high school and college just started to show me that. Be active, have fun, be engaged with a lot of kids of a lot of backgrounds and variety, and then maybe you can have some leadership and move things forward. That's those 8 years, I guess.
I have always been interested in this idea of the intersection of new waves in history and people who find themselves on that crest of that wave.
Okay.
I think you were and are.
Well, thank you. That's an interesting observation. So
because you were kind of on the leading edge of a lot of different things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and times were just, the 70s were those years. I graduated from Ames High in 1975, and then college in 1979. So I think America was just kind of trying to find itself. And again, a lot of different things with women, I think, were really at a pivotal point in the mid-70s. Just federal government-wise of the Title IX and all the things that started to shift. And trying to get women, again, I think, to have more of a prominent and fair employment situation of fair pay for equal work and all those things. So I just happened to come up through that. So that's, I think, maybe part of it too.
You graduated from the University of Northern Iowa, and here you are, an Ames kid. Did you ever think you would come back?
No, it's one of those where I would always say, you just never know, how your life is going to unfold and how God's going to develop you and change you and present situations to you. And so when I graduated, I had that double major, and so I prepared 2 different resumes, because they said it looked like you didn't know what you wanted if you have recreation and interior design on the same resume. So I had 2 of them, and the first job that came out was this job for a community center director in New Hampton, Iowa, and the pay wasn't very good. It was $8,500, and people majoring or graduates in 1979, they said a fair wage would probably be around $14,000. And so I thought, well, I'm not making anything today. $8,500 would be fine with me. So, and it's recreation, and I was going to be their first community center director. They'd received a federal grant. They had redone a municipal light plant into a congregate meal site for older adults, and then they wanted to try to have recreation for their community of 4,500 people. And so I thought, great. Thank goodness they hired me right out of college. I was 22. I really had no idea what it meant. And thank goodness they took a chance, because it went very well for 3 years when I was there.
You're in that particular community for 3 years. Is that when your Ames opportunity came up?
Well, no. I needed more experience, because Ames was just still so much larger, and Ames has always, I think, when you're in Ames, you don't know how much people value it from the outside and respect what we do have, and kind of admire Ames, I think, from the state in particular. So I needed more experience, and I knew that I was lacking in New Hampton. I didn't have the pool under my jurisdiction. And so I left there and I went to Waverly, Iowa, which is 10,000 people. And there my job was going to be still recreation, programming in general, but I was going to get adult sports and the pool. And they had a very large outdoor pool. And so I took that, because I knew I needed to continue to grow in those areas. So I was only there, and I feel bad about this, only 18 months. But by now I was also getting very active in our state Iowa Park and Recreation Association. And I had met and gotten to know Joe Stevens, who was the current director here in Ames, and Don Tripp, who was the recreation superintendent. And they informed me one time in a meeting that, hey, our aquatic supervisor we think is going to be leaving to go back to her hometown. So just FYI, there may be an opening for us in aquatics in Ames. Interesting. So that was it. I applied and I was hired, and I was so appreciative of the offer, because I'd only had one outdoor pool for one summer at Waverly, and Joe Stevens took a risk and hired me. And I started then here as the aquatic supervisor in April of 1985.
At that time, there was a municipal pool which had all year round swimming. And tell me what I call it Cars Pool because
Right, right.
I'm an Ames kid.
That's right.
But it by then had been purchased by the city, and it was carpool at that time.
Correct. When I came, we had the city had purchased Cars Pool, and then to show the ownership now that it was a city pool versus the Cars Pool, they dropped the possessiveness of that, and it just became carpool, which really I think offended and hurt a lot of people. They didn't like that. We also had Gateway Pool because the city had purchased in the early, just 1982-ish, the Ames Golf and Country Club site, because the Ames Golf and Country Club wanted to have an 18-hole golf course. They knew because of Highway 30 and what is now University Boulevard that they couldn't expand their course to have another 9 holes. So they I believe it was 1975, they moved to their current location now in North Ames for an 18-hole golf course. And so the city purchased that with some federal funds and totally renovated the clubhouse into the Parks and Recreation Administrative Office. And as we know today, Gateway Park is a beautiful, just 40-acre area. But we did have the country club pool. And we had carpool, and we had municipal pool.
Move along in your career for me, how it happened that you eventually became the Parks and Rec director.
Okay. I was the aquatic supervisor from 1985 to November of 1987. Don Tripp, who I mentioned previously, had left to go be a director in another state. And so Joe needed now a recreation superintendent. And so he called me into his office one day and he said, Nancy, Joe, as you know, Don's leaving, and if you're interested, I'd be interested in having you pursue the rec superintendent position. And I said, well, I would be interested. And TJ, I hope you'll appreciate this. Being female, this is still the early, 1987. He said, but Nancy, I have one concern. And you're going to have 100 men's softball teams. And how will you as a female, as rec superintendent, you have to manage those men. And they can get upset with softball. How would you ever do that as a female? And so I looked at it, and again, back then you think nothing of that question. It's just what it is. And so I said, well, Joe, I guess I would just have to be well prepared. I'd have to be knowledgeable. And if they ask me questions, I have to be coming from a informed perspective, because that's what I think they're going to want, is just me to know what I'm talking about. And I think it would go very well. And so I guess he liked the answer, because I did become the rec superintendent. And I was in charge, if you will, of 100 men's softball teams and co-rec volleyball teams. And they all had men and women. And it did go very well. So I did that for a couple of years. But it continued to help me round out my resume, because I'd done what I did at Waverly, having the aquatics. I had the aquatics then in a large way in Ames for probably 3 summers in year-round. And then from 1987 to 1991, I was the rec superintendent. And Ames does have a very comprehensive recreation program. For the first time now in that position, I had probably 6 full-time employees that I also had accountability for and leadership of. And so that really gave me that new perspective too, because it's different when you don't have full-time employees to lead versus seasonal. And so then in 1991, Joe Stevens left to go to another state to be a director. And Steve Schenker, who's still the current city manager, was back in 1980, or since 1985, I believe. He asked me then if I would be the acting director during the summer of 1991, because Joe left in May, and then there was a national recruitment for the director of Parks and Recreation. And so I was the acting during May to August, thankfully, and I always thank Steve, because again, I'd never been a director. The other people that had applied had all been directors from larger communities. And Steve took what I always believe was a risk. They hired me and he did it. And he will say, oh, I could see your progression, and You seem to have the same values that our residents want and desire in a director. So we took the journey together, and I was very honored that he hired me.
When you became the Parks and Rec director, when you came on board, you must have seen things that you really liked, and things that you felt could be improved or changed. And now you're in a position to act on it.
Right. And that's such a good observation, because Ames was Ames. You know, Iowa State University is here, and we're just so unique and so special as an Iowa community. And I valued that, because I had left for 10 years. And so I started to understand that though I'd grown up here and maybe took Ames more for granted than I should have, leaving for those 10 years showed me a lot, and that we were special and we do have opportunity. However, that being said, our recreational facilities were not what they needed to be for this community. And Steve Shanker realized that, and as did our Parks and Recreation Commission members during that era, and I did too as now a director. And so from day one, when I accepted it, I wanted obviously to continue all of our strength positions, but I also really wanted to put time and energy and be strategic around how do we now change the face of our recreational facilities. If you think about what 1999 was, we had a lot of what I always kind of considered hand-me-down facilities. And it was great for what we needed, and it filled a gap that this community desired. But is it going to take us the next 50 years? Probably not. So as an example, the hand-me-down in my mind was Carpool. It had been opened in the late 1920s or early 30s. Municipal pool was not a hand-me-down, but it was built and opened in 1965. And indoor pools are very hard. They're very corrosive environments. So again, it was starting to need help. Gateway Pool, hand-me-down again from the Ames Golf and Country Club. The Ames ISU Ice Arena was constructed, and having an ice arena in Iowa is very atypical. Very few communities have it. Waterloo, and back then it was Waterloo and us in Mason City, I think, only. So for us to even have an ice arena was good, but it had been built by volunteers. They had gone to Chicago and gotten the compressors, brought them over. They'd set on a flatbed semi-truck outside initially. We'd finally gotten them indoors. It was not a good situation. What else do we have? Homewood Golf Course, awesome little golf course, but it had been privately owned, and the city had gone in and purchased it for like $168,000. So just, Gateway Pool, the Country Club, just all of those, we needed attention, and we needed to say, what else can we do? So 1991 is when the city of Ames fortunately passed a bond issue for the city hall. And that gave us the first opportunity to start to turn the tide. Because other than that, we had no gymnasiums at Parks and Recreation's sole discretion. That we were not the first priority. We were using the school district's gyms. So that was the first jumping in point of the $6.8 million, I think, bond issue to totally reduce City Hall, which included then the gymnasium and the auditorium.
I had said that we were going to pick up that thread of security and what it was like to live and play in Ames within the park system. So when you were a youngster and you could get on your bicycle and you could ride to Carr's pool,
right? That's right.
Yes, with your 2 bucks,
that's right.
Or you could go play softball, because I think you played softball. When you flash forward to now, when you're a parks director, the times have changed.
Oh, dramatically.
So what stresses were there for you as a Parks and Rec director, knowing that this was not just about recreation and mental and health growth, but there were some worrisome things you had to deal with?
Yeah, no, there were. And again, just kind of the sign of the times back then of just society had changed. And yeah, security, not only facility security and how people used a building with their children perhaps, or locker rooms, or all those things, you had to have a different perspective, but also the park system. And so, and thank goodness, in the 21 years that I was director, we never had a major crisis in the Ames Park System. But I think, again, we tried to be proactive. We tried to educate people that it's not safe just to send your 10-year-old child to a community park unsupervised. They do need a parent or a guardian with them. Our recreation programs that we would have in the parks, like Camp Funshine, we would work with those seasonal employees to say, if you see something that seems different, unique, unusual, call the Ames Police. Because guess what? You are in a community park and strange things do happen, and there are unfortunately bad people. So we just started to coach and educate, and the Ames Police Department, credit to them though, because at the city we all tried to work together very well. And so the police department always would come and send staff to coach our seasonal employees what to look for and how to be more observant, and that they were there to be proactive, not reactive. So just things like that. And so I'm very thankful that, again, we'd never had a crisis. And I'm, again, just glad we dodged that. But I think, again, community education and being proactive and being wise.
And you didn't have to worry about misuse of facilities, or did that?
Oh, well, vandalism was always something that was just endless and disheartening and just crazy, because things that we would just think are ludicrous, it would happen to us. And we used to, for the Parks and Recreation Commission, we would always have our staff take pictures and then show what the vandalism was and what the cost to the taxpayer was to fix what had just been perfect before that. But things from putting picnic tables on top of shelters, pulling shelter shingles off, I mean, just, spray painting, just all the things you'd expect, taking M80 and blowing up things in the restroom. So just crazy things that you just always get so disheartened, because our goal was to make things beautiful, immaculate, and vandalism. But that was just the nature of public service. So it is what it is.
It was sort of a cost of doing business.
That's right, and that's just what it was. And so we didn't get too disgruntled or too upset, but it's reality.
Well, as a Parks and Rec director, you have several masters. I mean, there's a Parks and Recreation Board. I don't know if that exists in all communities, but that is an oversight.
Right.
And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean that in terms of an oversight and guidance.
That's right.
And of course, there's the city manager.
Right.
And of course, the ultimate people are the citizens themselves. So
that's right.
Here you are, Nancy.
Yeah.
You have a number of masters.
Yeah.
How did you balance all those needs?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, there are, and people that over the years that I would work with from the private sector, and they would see what they would say is just the patience of Job, if you will, to have to work with so many different entities of leadership and oversight. I never saw it that way. I just saw us all trying to serve, as you just mentioned, the resident of Ames. What do they want? How do they want it? And what are they willing to pay for? Because you can have a lot of wants and desires, but if the two don't sync in financing it, you can't move the ball forward. So I will always credit, we always had excellent, and I'm being genuine in this, we've always had excellent city councils. We've always had excellent Parks and Recreation Commission members. And both of those basically are volunteer positions. And if I think as a staff person you can be the point of public input, the council really gets it, as does potentially a Parks and Recreation Commission. We've had wonderful leaders, and the red thread in all of that is why I say they were excellent. Very rarely did we ever have anyone that was self-serving in those positions. And if you listen to people in other communities, they would say, oh, we're beside ourselves because we just had 3 new council members that got elected, and they are one-minded on this issue for our community. And then you're in trouble because you need diversity of perspective, and we always had that. So thank goodness that we did. In addition to that, we had excellent, consistent leadership from the city manager. And there is no one that I respect more or admire more professionally than Steve Shanker. He led me, he modeled the way consistently every day. His honesty and his integrity are his cornerstones. And I learned early on, we're here, Nancy, to serve the customer, which is our resident of Ames. And if they want a rec center and they want to pass a bond issue, great. If they don't, it's not because we didn't necessarily do it correctly. They just didn't. And so we don't fight that. We honor that and we move on. So it's our residents, our customer. And you can sit there and say that, but from just a lot of us have posters on the walls, oh, the customer's king, but it's true. He lived it every day and he expected it from us. So with that leadership, I knew who we were here to serve, and I knew that we had a Parks and Recreation Commission first, that if we wanted to try to accomplish something, but it was controversial, my job wasn't to try to change that resident. It wasn't to get him to come over to my side of thought or belief. It was then to take it to the commission and say, hey, here's what staff thinks and why, but the resident's thinking this and why. And the resident wants to come and speak to you publicly about it, so let's listen to them. And ultimately, they would decide, or if it was very controversial, it would go then to the next level of the city council. And it's a policy issue many times, and that was the process we used. So it wasn't antagonistic, different of opinion, different perspectives. If financing happened or not, it did or didn't. But that was the trajectory we always used, and really it was a joy to have that be the culture, because big picture it went very well.
Still, there must have been a little bit of disappointment to you. You came on board and it took almost 15 to 20 years to get a new outdoor pool.
It did.
Was there a little bit of disappointment there?
Oh, TJ, you bet. Because from day one, if you're doing your job as a professional, you should be out. In 1991, when I first became director, and I knew that Carpool was open, let's just say 1930, and I knew that Gateway Pool was 1940, and this is now 1991. And professionally, when I would go to our national conferences and go and visit other communities, they had these family aquatic centers. And whoa, this is fun. They have water slides and zero depth for toddlers to walk into, and now a play structure in the water versus sitting over on green grass as a playground structure. Ames needs to know this. So as early as 1991, we were coming back and saying, Ames, Carpool was only renovated, as was Gateway Pool, to get us another 10 to 15 years of service and life till we could get this figured out. And Gateway was only like 5 years, I think. So we started to educate and inform, and I'm big on, if people only know, we can convince them. That's just my nature, my personality. So I felt incumbent upon ourselves to educate and inform and get out and start meeting with the public and showing them what it could be and the fun it could be, and educating that it won't only be fun. If you pass a bond issue, it'll lower your taxes, because people will come to this in such a way that you won't have a $50,000 subsidy annually for Carpool. Well, easier said than done. So 1991 was our first attempt at passing a bond issue for a new family aquatic center that was proposed out on Oakwood Road, and it was going to have soccer fields next to it, because soccer right then was really starting to be a big wave of activity too, as kids started to play in big numbers. And the bond issue, TJ, got defeated. You need 60% approval. We got 26%. So that's just the door slammed. I was very disappointed. But that again is where I talk about Steve calling me the next day and saying, Nancy, you did well. You educated and you informed, and you told the pros and the cons and the tax implications of the capital investment as well as the operational. You did your job well. They didn't want it, so don't own it. And I hung up the phone that day. 1991. See, I'm still like mid-30s, and oh yeah, I'm not the failure per se. I did my job. So I learned from that, TJ. So that gave me the patience and the endurance. Every time we had a facility improvement that was needed, and as I've already mentioned, we had several. But also not to become complacent. That was the patience in me, and that again is a personality thing. If I believe in something, I will be relentless as long as my leadership tells me to continue to pursue it. And that was still the leadership I had from the council and the commission and the mayor or in the manager's office. No, we do need new facilities here, Nancy. So stay the course. We need to get out and listen more to our customer, the resident. Well, how do they want it? If that wasn't the package, then what do we need to learn from them in? And that continued to be the cycle for many, many other capital improvement projects and bond issues that we did go after in the years to come. They weren't all successful, a few were.
Do you think that there was an interesting combination of closed pocketbooks, perhaps the idea that people really didn't want to open up their pocketbook for something, that concept, as well as some well-placed at sometimes, but maybe not so well-placed, passion for old things?
Yeah, interesting, yeah.
What took so long?
That's great. Again, I really, these are my opinion only. But I could be more candid with people that were in key positions, names, because I grew up here. So I wasn't an outsider. So I think it was a combination that people felt like, for some reason, that Iowa State facilities were Ames facilities. And, well, why would we need these things? Because Iowa State has them. And Iowa State, in fairness to them, used to be very liberal with their open door policy. You didn't have to have a student ID. You didn't have to be a student or a faculty or staff just to go and use Iowa State's state gym as an example. You wanted to play basketball, you want to use their running track, just go over there and go in. And so I don't know if people start thinking, well, we just will do that for free. So even then we would start to say, well, no, those are Iowa State facilities. Ames needs to start to do what Ames needs to do for Ames residents. So that was that educational journey that we had to go on. I will always say, and I think it's fair, that Ames is more of a frugal, conservative community. And we would try to go after projects and for passing bond issues. And I would go before key leaders that had personal wealth in Ames, and they would say things to me like, Nancy, why do you think Ames needs to pass a bond issue for, well, it was the Recplex back then, and it was for like $24 million, and the Recplex was going to finally have multiple gymnasiums, elevated running track, an indoor warm water recreational pool that older adults and families wanted, and this outdoor aquatic center. And that bond issue was going to, I think we voted on that in like 2003 maybe. And when we were out trying to educate and inform about that, people would say, well, I don't know why, as a city staff, you always are trying to do Ames, these Cadillac facilities. And I said, with all due respect, sir, I won't fill in the name today, but he was from Ames for generations. I had gone to school with his children, so I knew him very well. And I said, with all due respect, please list the Cadillac facilities that we have for the Ames community resident. Because we didn't have any. They were all hand-me-down facilities that we could discuss. And I think that was the first time that it was like, now that you say that, they all have been hand-me-downs. We have this idea that we always want these Cadillac things in Ames. It's not true. So it was those kind of candid conversations, TJ. It was, but not in an argumentative way. It was just really trying to say factually, let's do facts. And Ames deserves better. And we do need to be progressive and for healthy, and people there was a shift now happening too within society. People were starting to value their health and well-being. That really wasn't, I don't think, none of us understood that in the 70s and the 80s. So the 90s were starting to tip. People were starting to worry about their health, their heart rate and their cholesterol levels. So that helped us too.
I know that in a city leadership position, you're bound to encounter all manner of attitudes and behaviors by citizens. And so, were there some funny things that happened, some odd or funny things? And would you be willing to share, Nancy?
Yeah. Well, internally, the staff, we would always say, oh, we should have started a book. And I guess the public stories aren't as dramatic as the internal ones with our seasonal staff, because to do what we ended up doing, by the time we really hit our stride with then having a new ice arena, a new beautiful $10 million outdoor aquatic center, we had probably yearly maybe 300 to 350 seasonal employees, and probably 80% of those were between the ages of 18 and 22. And let me tell you, they're awesome. You could not have better seasonal employees than college students. They have energy and passion, and they love little kids or they love older adults. So it was really good. But if they couldn't come up with some of the most bizarre things you could do as an employee, that was where the bizarreness, you never knew what could possibly happen the next day. And the one that comes to mind, the most dramatic was, and I hate to share it, but it is reality. If you want to know a story of, again, that many college kids, one of our supervisors at the Ames Arena, and this was now after the new facility had opened, so a $3.8 million facility. It was probably 4 or 5 years old. He and his friends had gone out and gotten drunk during the night. He had the keys to the Ames ISU Ice Arena, came in, opened it up for him and his friends to come in and play hockey during the night. He knew how to resurface the ice, so he knew he better leave the ice looking good. He resurfaced the ice, still intoxicated. He left, and right then when he's leaving of this night of hockey, our full-time employee is coming to the ice arena to open up, because we open at 5 a.m. And he could tell this employee was still intoxicated. So needless to say,
I'm just wondering how you felt when that story came across your desk.
And that's the example. You just don't know what college kids are going to come up with to do. Bless their hearts, and we've all been 18 to 22-year-olds. So, but when you think of the impact that could have been, no one got hurt, nothing got damaged. He lost his job. But if I have one of those stories, I would have 50 if I thought of. So the job wasn't just what the public saw. It was also managing 200 to 300 seasonal employees that all meant well, but could do anything on any given day. And so you have to manage the human resource component too. And that was probably always more the challenge, because you always, just who I am, my personality is, I want to be making it better, and I want to take it to the next level. And now I have to deal with performance issues, and I have to deal with firing someone in the conversation that we've all experienced. It's just, but that was 10% of my life as director of Parks and Recreation. The other 90 was what we've been talking about. But that was the challenge always.
I think you've already alluded to this, but I'll just ask again. You had a tenure as Parks and Recreation where you really didn't have any major crises that were human produced.
No, that's correct. No, and I was always so thankful, because one of the most haunting things always was, will something happen to someone at one of the pools? And or another thing that started to really become popular as the water quality treatment was starting to have a lot of ponds for filtering water. So will a child fall into a pond near a park? We had the rivers. Ames, I haven't mentioned the park system much, but one of the things that has made Ames Park System so tremendous were the 2 rivers that do go through it. Because we have so much floodplain, we have tremendous amount of green open space and woodlands that other communities don't have. Excuse me. So though the rivers could be a curse when it floods, they're a tremendous blessing the majority of the time. Excuse me. And so with that being said, we have an awesome park system, always have and always will, for those rivers. But yet they're inherently dangerous. When we got Ada Hayden Heritage Park, big worry. And I always, when I started this conversation, I've always been big in educate and inform. Because people lots of times don't know what they're up against. So at Ada Hayden, when we opened that, it's a 437 acre park, but 120 acres approximately is water. And it used to be a quarry. And what people and parents do not know when they go to fish and maybe take their 4 or 5-year-old with them is, when you walk about 1 foot off the shoreline, it goes to 40 foot, just like that. And people don't know that. So we would put signs up that said, warning, within 1 foot off the shore, it goes to 40 foot depth. because I would go there initially, and you get, when you open something like that, there's such a learning curve because you never had one, and how are people going to use it? You have to learn all that from just people doing it. And I would see, again, usually dads, unfortunately, but with their 5-year-old, and here they are fishing, the dad's fishing and not watching his toddler. So boom, signs went up immediately. We do brochures. We had friends of Ada Hayden as park ambassadors to walk out and talk and educate people. So the same thing, my worry, how people were using it translated into educate, inform, and we never, to this day, have not had any serious accident or injury at Ada Hayden Heritage Park. So I'm just thankful and appreciative, because it can happen any day at any facility to anyone, and it happens. And I was so thankful that it never did happen when I was there, because I don't know what it would have done to me emotionally and personally. But I didn't have to experience that, and I'm thankful.
Nature can hand things to Parks and Recreation people.
Yeah.
You, fortunately or unfortunately, they say there are 100-year floods.
Yeah.
Right. You had a 100-year flood in 1993. Yeah. Oh, and then, not too much later, another 100-year flood.
Yeah. Yeah.
What did that do?
Oh, it was so sad. The 1993, again, I'd only been director since 91, and it was in June, and it was Father's Day, June 17th, 1993. And we hadn't had any major floods for a long time. And the softball complex on East 13th Street was beautiful. And Brookside was gorgeous that day. And it's so ironic, because as we know now, when a flood comes, it might take 24 hours to get here from Fort Dodge and the river's rising. So we're standing out there the day before hearing that it's going to flood. And I'm sitting there, no. And lo and behold, it did. It got in 1993 to almost 1 foot below the shelter roofs at Brookside. It was going over the river, or it was going over the 6th Street. I then drove across town. The sports complex, it was gorgeous, was now just underwater. And the damage it causes is just heartbreaking to us, because now we sit there and think, well, people won't get to play softball, and we have to come back in and clean all this up and restore it to the beauty it just was yesterday. So that happened frequently. And the only thing that gets really, again, asking about what's frustrating is the users, when the water goes away, they expect now, well, we should be right back there tomorrow at 5 with our softball game. No, we had to go get ag line brought in from Anamosa, and it's going to take us a few weeks. And then FEMA, there's thousands of dollars of damage that FEMA has to come from the federal government and inspect. So that was always hard for the resident to understand the long-term implications, but we always worked hard to get it turned around. And that's what I'm saying, the rivers were a curse and a blessing all in one. And I will still say it's still worth it to have them. The Ames residents are forgiving if you tell them why, and when reasonably you can anticipate something to be back up and running. Well, it's about communication. If you say, please, this is the time period, and if you're reasonably close to that time period, that's right, I think they'll understand. That's right. And we always, Steve Shanker's leadership, which was instilled within me, is you tell people what you know, when you know it, and always be transparent with your customer and our residents, same people. Mm-hmm. And that was just how we did business. If we could do something, I told him. If we couldn't, I did. If we needed to get funding, we would just say, well, here's why we can't. Here's why it is like this. And that was just our style, if you will, the culture we tried to create. And honesty and integrity were always our hallmarks, I would say. And it went very well with the residents of Ames. And to this day, the residents of Ames are awesome, and they always were. You were Parks and Rec director over a really dramatic expansion, not only of facilities, but of parkland itself. You've alluded to the Ada Hayden Heritage Park. Mm-hmm. That's quite a credit to you. Oh, well, TJ, thank you. First of all, thank you. I'm just appreciative I got the opportunity that Ames was positioned, because certain things have to happen. And you happen to be in leadership when something does or doesn't happen. So as an example, the quarry was either going to be abandoned or it wasn't during that time frame. And lo and behold, we had it in our park master plan in the mid-90s that it wasn't probably going to actually be a point of discussion for another maybe 20 years. And lo and behold, it happened. And then a lot of controversies swelled around that. Would a private development come and be around it? Water quality, people started to understand from the drought of the mid-1970s that Ada Hayden, or that the quarry served as a secondary water source during droughts for the Ames aquifer system. And so that now, with heightened awareness of environmental sensitivity, water quality, we got to be in control of our own destiny. It was the leadership, and I was at the council meeting when it happened. It was Ann Campbell that made the motion. Judy Hoffman seconded it. Ted Tedesco was mayor, I believe, at the time. That they said, refer it to staff. We're not going to consider this anymore. Water quality is paramount to this community. We're not going to do a development. Refer it to staff to see if it can become a community park. Boom! And that's what happened. So the leadership has to happen first at a high level to say, we see what's going on, big picture, and for the longevity of Ames. And
now, there were also some very passionate people.
Yes, there were, and educated, smart people.
I recall that in addition to that, there was a component. Sometimes it can work for you, and sometimes it work against you, because there was passion, for example, against getting rid of carpool.
You betcha.
But there's passion here for preserving the area, and I think that probably worked in your favor as well.
There were thank you, and that's true of government, and that's why we, as a city staff, will say, oh, being a city employee is really a challenge, because you always, frequently, not as much in Parks and Recreation as you do in planning and housing, you have competing customers. You just do, and that's the nature of the beast. And you have to understand that as a staff person, they are both your taxpayer customers equally. So your passion for what you think should become a park or should become a housing development adjacent to the quarry, you have to keep that intention. But we had developers as passionate for getting it to be housing as we did for residents that said, no, here's why it needs to become a park. And TJ, this is something I'm glad we hit upon this today, because having Iowa State University here has been still one of the best things for this community. Almost any time on any issue in government in Ames, you can go to Iowa State University and get an expert that has a PhD in this specific thing to say what's really going on here. With, as an example, the water quality, if you would have a housing development versus if it's a park. What's factual? Because what happens with passion, and I think as employees in a government setting, you have to get to what's factual, because everyone has perception, and perception's not always reality. So Iowa State University would bring, because they'd done research on that quarry for years. John Downing was the pivotal person. He was world renowned in water quality for Iowa State University, but he's an Ames resident, so he personally got involved on his own time, own initiative, to come before the Ames City Council. And when I say that Ann and Judy said, we've heard now enough, and this had gone on for months, if not years really, it was because people like John Downing could speak factually with data, and the council came from an educated, informed perspective. And then they can speak to the people that are on the other side of the issue. Here's the facts. And thank goodness, it really is, we all know now, and I'm so thankful it worked. The bond issue got passed, that we did get a state grant, or a state for $1.5 million. So it's a $6.8 million enhancement that happened in North Ames that will be there now forever. And I'll get in, because this is a historic video. The one thing that was central now when we open that park, what's it going to be like? How are we going to sell the bond issue? Should it be a park that's, because of the water, should it have a beach and a bathhouse, and should it have a pavilion that would accommodate 200-300 people at one given time? And same thing, we went out, we talked to the Ames residents, our customers, and we talked about, hey, should it be preserved more like what Iowa would have been like 100 years ago, or should it be this beach and more entertainment and hoopla, if you will. And the feedback we got, and I'm so thankful this was the feedback, no, try to make it what it used to be. Let's go back in time, and let's try to resurrect, even though it was a man-made water feature of a quarry, let's try to make it be 100 years ago feel. So that's the bond issue we passed. And And we had to know before we passed the bond issue, because it's all going to be related, how much development can we do. And so when you go out there to this day, there is no beach and there is no big shelter. It's a little tiny shelter because a lot of people can't gather and be noisy. And 100 years ago in Iowa, we would have had prairie and we would have had wildlife, and it's turned. And it didn't take very long. There, again, because of Iowa State University faculty, there was a person that has a PhD in bird watching, and I'm sure it has much more formal title than that, but he lived there, and so he had observed the bird activity, wildlife activity, when it was Corey and every year thereafter. And when we opened finally the park, there were maybe, I think, 50 different species of birds. Within a few years, and to this day, there's over like 250 to 300 species of birds. So it really has worked, and we do feel like what it would have been like 100 years ago. We named it after Ada Hayden. That was a whole process because of her growing up there, going to Iowa State, and that's a whole nother story you can do someday. But it's really worked. So.
Another happy ending is the area around Roosevelt School, but it had some contentious times too.
It did.
Can you walk me through that?
Yeah, it did. And see, it's that tension again, I guess, of should it be developed, should it be kept, or should it be a school? I mean, all those issues, and you always have niches or segments of a community that have a passion for something. So, be it, should we close Carpool? Should it be transition Roosevelt into a housing development with a park next to it? The similar thing, I think, in all of them is you have to go out and you meet with people, you talk to them, you understand their passion and their issues, and then yet you stay the course with your policymakers to say, here is what we have heard. And you always just are transparent, both with people that have the passion and transparent with your policymakers, say, here's what it is. And ultimately, it's their burden to bear at a council meeting on a Tuesday night to see what the majority of the council want to do. And then staff is to implement that 100% with a positive spirit. Because it doesn't always go the way you want as a staff. But that's, as we talked, that's not the nature of government. You do what your policymakers want and your residents in the majority. And you're never going to, as we know, you're never going to make everybody happy. But you kind of move on. And I've learned this over decades. What may be the worst thing that someone thinks can ever happen, once it does, it usually can, in time heals all wounds. It does. And people, and Carpool is a good example of that. We had such passionate people, bless their hearts, that would slowly start to come over to the Furman Aquatic Center, and they would periodically say to me, I want you to know I was dead set against this, but I do want you to know I like it. And then they go on. And so that's just the nature of human beings.
There's a question that I always ask at the end of these conversations, and I ramble a little bit to give you a chance to form your own thoughts. And what I always do is I give people a chance to say something or make a remark or express something that perhaps I haven't thought to ask you.
Oh, okay.
So I am now giving you an opportunity, if there's something that I've not asked you or something that you'd like to say about the Ames Parks or your involvement with it, this would be your opportunity.
Oh, thank you, TJ. City government is a very unique thing that we're privileged to get to be a part of. Number one, because we just have the democracy we have and we don't realize that. And the freedom that we get to express and the way government is organized is just, I think, an amazing thing, first of all. And if it's done well, and it doesn't matter if you're at the library or Public Works or Parks and Recreation, if you listen to your resident and you do have a heart to want to serve them, understanding you're not going to please everybody all the time, and then let the process play out. Ames, Iowa has been extremely well managed, well led from the mayors and the councils and the Parks and Recreation commissions, and a staff that really does bring, on the best day, what we can to wanting it to be what Ames can be. And so I'm just thankful I was born and raised here. I'm thankful I got to come back and be in a key leadership position. And that's what I always said to people, do you like your job? When things were hard or challenging, I'd say, yeah, because every day, all day, I got to be central in quality of life issues. And what could be more fun than that? I mean, quality of life. You're always every day trying to make your own community better. And so, no, I just love the democracy part of it, and I love Ames and Iowa State. We just, I don't think until you leave or you come back, you understand how blessed we truly are of what we've always had in this community. And I just hope, and again, with great leadership moving forward in the community, it'll just continue for the next generation and multiple generations thereafter.
Thank you so much for your service.
Oh, I was honored, and it was my privilege. I loved every day of it.
And thank you for also being a woman in that leadership position.
Oh, thank you. Well, I didn't realize it. Again, you just get the opportunities, they unfold, and it was atypical, because there were, I think I was maybe there were only two of us, I think, in Iowa, major Iowa cities, that have ever been Parks and Recreation directors, and now there are many more. I mean, a lot of wonderful things have changed, but in those years, and that was again, I was honored and privileged that I got to do it.
And thank you for talking with me today.
My privilege. Thank you.